From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's lecture titled Washington, D.C. Witness Tree by Dr. Paul Dolinsky. My name is Mari Nakahara, the curator of Architecture, Design, and Engineering at the library's Prints and Photographs division. I also serve as a coordinator for today's program. The lecture is one of the 2016 National Cherry Blossom Festival official events co-hosted by the library's Prints and Photographs division, Asian division, and the Asian Division Friends Society. I actually used to work at the Asian division as a reference librarian, and I was asked my former supervisor to circulate this. If you wish to become a member of the Asian Friends Society, please sign on, and I will just put it back. Pursuing one of the library's goals of providing general understanding of American culture, intellectual and social life, and of other peoples and nations, we have been hosting events and programs related to cherry blossoms since 2012, when we celebrated the 100th anniversary of cherry blossom tree gift from the city of Tokyo to Washington, D.C. The library holds over 160 million items, covering an almost universal range of subjects in diverse formats, including resources related to cherry blossoms and their history. The library hosted Sakura, Cherry Blossom as Living Symbols of Friendship exhibition in 2012. The exhibition and its gallery talk, and also many educational materials, are still available via the library's website. Although the scale is much smaller, the library again provides an opportunity for the general public to view the library's historical and contemporary images related to cherry trees as an agile case display. In celebration of the National Park Service's 100th anniversary this year, the display also includes items related to national parks and introduces documents from the Historic American Building Survey, Historic American Engineering Record, and Historic American Landscape Survey, which we call HABS, Hair, and House. HABS, Hair, and House thrive through corporate agreements amongst the National Park Service, the Library Congress, and professional organizations. The Park Service creates new documentation every year, which the library preserves and adds to the online collection. The 2016 National Cherry Blossom Festival is calling attention to the benefits of parks and connecting more people with them. The display was supposed to be ready by today. However, a little incident has caused a delay in installation. Once it's installed, I am hoping within a week, it will be on view until the end of June. So please come back and take a look. It's going to be on the first floor of this building. Please also note that the library has 2 of 100 remaining original cherry blossom trees on site, which the library's Public Affairs Office confirmed with the National Park Service in 2012. One of them is located right behind of this building near the corner of the 2nd Street and Independence Avenue. Unfortunately, the blossoms are gone, but you may want to stop by to look at it. It is leaning on a crutch like this and has a plaque, so you won't miss it. Before introducing today's speaker, please note that this event is being videotaped for broadcast on the library's website and other media. We encourage you in audience to ask questions and offer comments during the question and answer period, but please realize that in participating in the Q&A period, you will be consenting to the library's possible reproducing and transmitting your remarks. Now, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Paul Dolinsky. Dr. Paul Dolinsky has long been associated with historic preservation in general and architecture and landscape architecture documentation in particular. Professionally trained in architecture, landscape architecture, and architectural history, he was uniquely qualified to work with the Historic American Building Survey, HABS, of the National Park Service. Dr. Dolinsky began to work with HABS in 1979 as an architectural technician working with teams measuring historic structures and producing ink-on-Mylar drawings. He eventually became a project supervisor and a national chief of program in 1993. During tenure as chief, he instituted many changes to the program, such as computer-aided drafting, electronic distance measuring devices, photogrammetry, and digital laser measuring, as well as significantly expanding the historic research components. During the 1980s, there was a strong interest in the unique nature of historic landscape architecture with the cultural landscape movement. Dr. Dolinsky was instrumental in developing a series of projects that ultimately resulted in the creation of the Historic American Landscape Survey, HALS, in 2000 with the American Society of Landscape Architects, National Park Service, and the Library of Congress. This rapidly expanding program has been extremely effective in the last 16 years, now having representation in 49 of the 50 states, as well as significant landscape documentation Americans saw abroad. Dr. Paul Dolinsky has been serving and contributing as chief of HALS since it was established. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Dolinsky.
Those are hard boots to fill. My goodness, I'm not sure if I know that person. But anyway, Mari, thank you very much for that incredibly generous and eloquent introduction. It is quite a privilege to be here today, and I'm equally delighted to see so many new faces, but so many familiar faces from my friends in the Prints and Photographs division. I certainly hope I can meet your expectations and provide you some good information to think about after you leave. After Mari asked me to speak, I considered many, many different topics that I thought might be interesting for a more general audience. And I quickly realized that I'd possibly be seeing a lot of yawns in the room should I proceed down that avenue. So I finally settled on speaking about something we all see every day and how we might look at it through a slightly different set of lenses after you leave this room. And more importantly, have some fun during the process. So, big surprise, I'm going to talk about trees, but with the lens of archival documentation in mind. Documentation to the standards of the Historic American Landscapes Survey, or as is more affectionately known, HALS. But before we can do that, I need to briefly discuss its parent program, the Historic American Building Survey, HABS, for some of the context. By the way, in case you're wondering, the photograph in the front is on the first slide there is the view from the front porch of Lawrence Rockefeller's home at the Marsh Millings Rockefeller National Historic Site. I think who would not love to be sitting there during the summer? But actually, like I said, we will look a little bit at HABS for some context and how HALS was a logical progression, if you will, of the HABS mission. Not a very quick or easy task, but bear with me through some leaps of faith because we only have about a half hour. You can easily dig deeper into either in any of the three programs. There is a tremendous amount of published information about each one of them and how HALS was a natural outgrowth, pun intended. Sorry. And then we'll finally focus on the HALS Witness Trees of Washington, D.C. pilot project, all within the allotted half hour or so. As I said, to put HALS in context, I really need to speak about the Historic American Building Survey. Very briefly, it is a Roosevelt administration initiative under the aegis of the WPA to provide temporary employment for architects and draftsmen unemployed as a result of the Great Depression. Like I said, volumes have been written about HABS, but for our purposes and in its simplest terms, it is one of the anchors of our federal government's preservation programs. Hundreds of architects, draftsmen, and photographers were hired temporarily for a 4-month period across the United States to produce measured architectural drawings, written history, and large format photography of the complete resume of the American builder's art. And thanks to significant input from the Library of Congress, everything was completed in standardized formats, was to be durable, reproducible, and verifiable. Why do this? Well, the obvious reason is, of course, to employ the struggling architects of the period, or at least provide them some temporary relief. But more importantly, the collateral benefits of these documents turned out to be far more than an academic record. In the burgeoning historic preservation movement, in the 1920s, 26s, Colonial Williamsburg, etc., these drawings, history, and photographs proved to be invaluable to provide existing condition documentation as the basis for restoration, insurance needs for historic structures, interpretive needs, and fundamentally to maintain the resources and the facility management. I'd love to show you a couple early HABS examples. That one there, by the way, pardon me, on top is the General Cowles House in Farmington, Connecticut, a wonderful neoclassical structure. On the right is the large format photograph, on the left the measured drawing, and beneath it is the plan of the ruined San Juan Capistrano in California. One of my very favorite drawings in the collection, this is the La Prette Mansion, drawn in 1934 in New Orleans, and that wonderful photograph looking from the balcony, really illustrating the laciness of that beautiful ironwork. The success of the 4-month temporary relief was obvious. It needed to be done on a long-term basis, and it was validated by a permanent plan for approval and disposition of all future graphic records of historic American architecture. That is Gustav Roerich, standing in front of his sod house in Nebraska. There are very few sod houses, I think, if any, left. And on the left side is the measured drawing, not only of the house, but of the way the sod is actually packed together and how the house is actually built. As Mari said a little bit about, we exist through a tripartite agreement. The National Park Service is where I am based. We administer and run the programs. The American Institute of Architects advises our professionalism and makes recommendations for documentation. And we're here in the Library of Congress, which preserves and distributes our records. It was made permanent and validated in 1935 by the Historic Sites Act as a regular duty of the federal government. The architects and landscape architects employed during the initial 4 months of the survey recognized the significance of historic landscapes through a very small subset program of the Historic American Building Survey. It was called the Historic American Landscapes and Garden Project. Unfortunately, it sunset after the initial 4 months, but the benefit of some of their documentation will be very evident in some of the slides we see. This is the Lindens in its original setting up in Danvers, Massachusetts. It now sits up in Kalorama. You may know it was moved here in the late 30s, and it's currently for sale. I think it's 8.7 million right now, so it's gone up in price a little bit, I think. But this is a 1934 photograph of this great 1754 Georgian wooden New England mansion. And here's the site plan that was done by the landscape architects working for HALGP. You can see the house itself sort of enunciated a little bit darker on the one side of it, but there's the lawn, the formal gardens behind it, and above, of course, the vegetable gardens. But the landscape architects dug a little deeper, and they produced on top, you'll see an evolutionary drawing showing the home in the 18th century and sort of has it evolved up to 1934 on the upper right. And then below, there are many, many drawings of detailed garden plans of every single flower, every single plant. They really dug in deep and did an extraordinary job documenting this house and garden. This is another one of my very favorite early documents. This is the Captain Thomas Bennett sunken garden. You can see that sort of sunken knot garden. It's like a platter. You step down into it, surrounded by a hedge, very, very private. But the elevations of the garden are tilted up and to the left. And in the far right, you see they even dug in and drew the sundial in elevation and plan and completely filled on one sheet of paper a complete document of the Thomas Bennett sunken garden. Another one of my favorites, magnificent 18th century Georgian gates and fence at the Pierce Place in Salem, Mass. There's about half a dozen drawings of how these gates are put together with all the details, and then, of course, the great photos. Another very early landscape element document, a folly, a garden house, summer house, this great sort of Chinese Chippendale little summer house in a garden, beautiful photograph and beautiful drawings, should you want to build one in your own backyard. I was always impressed by this early set of drawings in the Vieux Carré in New Orleans. That is a comprehensive measure drawing of one entire square block, every detail there, and then the elevations of the structures that make up the block from the outside. Cover a little bit of geography here. They were in Acoma in New Mexico. Many, many drawings of the great old pueblo there. You'll see a great aerial photograph of the pueblo, and there's just the first drawing of the overall site plan. Basically, landscape documentation continued as part of HABS from 1934 up until the mid to late 70s, when there started to be more interest in the documentation of historic landscape architecture. When I first joined the program, I also have a degree in landscape architecture, I was asked to run a series of pilot projects that would look at what is different about landscape architecture than architecture. What is so different when an architect looks at something versus a landscape architect? So we were asked to do a number of pilot projects in the 70s. The first major one was actually more of an architectonic landscape, but it's Meridian Hill Park in Washington, D.C., that extraordinary cascade of fountains and the upper formal parterres. The measured drawings, you can see it's located directly north of the White House, above 16th Street, and there's a detailed drawing of it on one side, followed by about 28 sheets of other drawings. But the important message here is these drawings, histories, and photographs that were produced ultimately informed sort of the burgeoning cultural landscape movement. You needed this information, you needed these types of measured drawings, the supporting research and photographs to inform the analysis and treatment recommendations for the preservation of these sites. And here you'll see the Meridian Hill drawings there, and that is a copy of the Cultural Landscape Report, which is currently being used in the restoration of Meridian Hill Park. So in essence, we're building the case for the establishment of HALS. All this ultimately informed the establishment of HALS and the landscape survey because landscape architecture is indeed unique. So that's a lot of background covered very quickly, actually about 50 years of HABS and another 25 years of HALS to get us up to the present. And like I said, we only have about a half hour or so here, so hopefully this will intrigue you enough. If you just search it on any engine, trust me, you'll get a huge amount of information. And I encourage you just to go to the library's collection, our collection at the library. It is staggering. I think it's currently just shy of 45,000 sites or something like that. It's been functioning now 80 plus years. So now let's have a little fun. I was musing over some examples that might have influenced my thinking in a less serious way, maybe a more of a popular culture way, to explore HAL's documentation of historically and botanically significant trees, linking together the historic and cultural side of the National Park Service with the scientific and natural side of the National Park Service. We tend not to play in the same sandbox. And they have a lot more money on the natural side, so we're always struggling on this side. So I'm always trying to find money to raise money for projects. So this idea sort of coalesced. Maybe we can figure some way to use trees to knit them two together a little bit and have some fun and do some serious documentation. So I hope you'll recognize this image. It is the famous talking apple tree in Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's 1939 fantasy adventure, The Wizard of Oz. The tree encountered by Dorothy Toto, the Tin Man, the Lion, and the Scarecrow on their way down the yellow brick road to Emerald City. The Library of Congress has declared this book America's greatest and best loved homegrown fairy tale. I like to refer to this particular scene as the vegan slap, where the tree in a very angry stentor voice says, "How would you like to have someone come along and pick something off of you?" This particular apple tree is not just a living thing. But it can actually breathe and speak. It actually argues, and of course throws apples. Or how about the remarkable Swiss Family Robinson treehouse? Every child's dream. The romance of a treehouse, in this case, a treehouse on steroids from the 1960 movie of the same name. Would I have loved to have had that treehouse, but indeed my fantasy was realized. A 150-ton concrete and reinforced steel Swiss Family treehouse opened in 1962 in Adventureland at Disneyland, and it only required a sea ticket. The whole thing, though, was recreated in 1971 at Disney World, recreated in 1992 at Euro Disneyland, and finally again in Tokyo Disney in 1993. A truly sort of pan-cultural tree experience. Or how about this one? I don't know if you recognize this one, the Whomping Willow. It debuted in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. It is a very violent species of magical plant, sort of a tree with a mean personality. Whomping willows. Are there any botanists in the audience? I don't know. I can't resist this. It's a Salix wampus. I couldn't resist. It will attack anything and anyone that comes within range of its branches. We must not be hasty. Things will go as they will, and there is no need to hurry to meet them, quoth Treebeard from The Lord of the Rings. Treebeard is the oldest of the Ents still left in Middle-earth, an ancient tree-like being who is sort of the shepherd of all trees. He has a very tall and stiff-limbed appearance with bark-like skin and leafy hair. According to books, Ents are much stronger than trolls, as trolls are just crude imitation of Ents. And last, but certainly not least, I could go on, the Tree of Souls from Avatar, the source of all energy and light. I'm not fluent in Na'vi, so I will not dare attempt the correct pronunciation, but it is a giant willow-like tree that is a point of extreme spiritual significance to the Na'vi. More so than any other location on the planet Pandora for at least 3,000 years. The destruction of the Tree of Souls would prove devastating to the Na'vi as a whole and would create a cultural and religious void that would decimate their race entirely. Such is the significance of trees in our extremely creative fiction. My mind really did wander in that one. I went to Paul Bunyan, Johnny Appleseed. There are a lot of opportunities to sort of relate trees in a popular way. But here are a few quick examples of actual trees that elicit and evoke similar responses, very profound responses. The redwoods at Muir National Forest. The sequoia of California and Oregon are among the largest and tallest trees in the world, living for thousands of years. John Steinbeck wrote about redwood in 1961 in his travels with Charlie in Search of America. The redwoods once seen leave a mark or create a vision that stays with you always. No one has ever successfully painted or photographed a redwood tree. The feeling they produce is not transferable. From them comes silence and awe. It's not only their unbelievable stature, nor the color which seems to shift and vary under our eyes. No, they're not like any other trees we know. They are ambassadors from another time. Or how about the Avenue of Oaks from Oak Alley? The grand dame of the Great River Road, Oak Alley Plantation, is a National Historic Landmark located on the west bank of the Mississippi River in Vacherie, the St. James Parish in Louisiana. Oak Alley is named, of course, for that distinguished visual feature, an alley created by a double row of living southern live oaks, about 800 feet long and planted in the early 18th century, long before the present Greek Revival focal point in the picture was built. The alley, or Tree Avenue, runs between the home and the river. And finally, of course, to sort of bring it home a little bit, our White House Christmas tree, the official indoor Christmas tree at the residence of the President of the United States. Trust me, I came up with a lot more popular culture examples, but hopefully these will be sufficient to drive home the point of the role of influences of trees in our society. Probably going to be a little blurry out there. Like I said, I was musing over a way to connect the natural side with the culture side of the National Park Service, and the idea of using trees that have witnessed significant cultural events coalesced into the Witness Tree Protection Program. I hope you see a little humor in that one. But more seriously, trees are landmarks. They are memorials. They identify us. They identify human happenings. We love them. And they carry their associations through generations. The idea of somehow preserving them through documentation became the core of the project. The National Capital Region of the National Park Service embraced it and funded the project completely. and we're off and running and completed HALS documentation on 24 witness trees as a pilot project for the nation. I would like to show you, not all 24, but a few of them briefly and sort of soak you in the idea of what a witness tree is. The Burnside Bridge American sycamore, a Platanus occidentalis, located at the Antietam National Battlefield. The Burnside Bridge American sycamore is a living monument to those who fought there on September 17, 1862. With over 23,000 total casualties, the Battle of Antietam was not only the bloodiest day of the Civil War, but also the bloodiest day in all of American history. And there you see a picture of Union Army General Ambrose Everett Burnside with those great mutton chops. This tiny bridge played a key role in the battle. Burnside and the Federal Ninth Corps had been charged with first taking a stone bridge spanning Antietam Creek. Burnside's attack was delayed some 5 hours behind the original schedule, and when he finally did attack, the entrenched Confederates repelled several charges by concentrating their fire on that narrow bridge opening on the creek's eastern bank. Burnside's force of 12,000 was held at bay by a mere 400 resolute Georgians, the brigade that held off a corps. Standing beside that bridge is another historic feature known as the Burnside sycamore, a witness tree. The tree can be seen in photos by the famous Civil War photographer in the lower right there, Alexander Gardner. And over 150 years later, it still remains as a direct link to the story and to the past. Or how about the Jackson magnolia, a Magnolia grandiflora, located on the south side of the White House. The Jackson magnolia is a wonderful 180-year-old story of a tree that replaced itself. This story started in 1829 when President Andrew Jackson left his Tennessee home and journeyed to the White House for his inauguration and presidency. Legend has it he had a sprout from one of his wife Rachel's favorite magnolia trees. At that time, though, he was in mourning for his wife, who had died just a few months before his inauguration. Taking a sprout of the magnolia tree obviously had a strong meaning for Andrew Jackson, and the majestic tree has had a strong meaning for many presidents since then, as well as their families. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill commented many times, "We sat underneath that old magnolia tree." It's a remarkably durable specimen and quite a survivor. You may recall in 1994, it was hit by a two-seat Cessna plane hitting the south side of the house. It hit the tree, did some serious damage, but it's still there. And finally, to complete the story, a cutting from the Jackson magnolia made a return trip to the Hermitage to replace the original tree that was destroyed by a tornado in 1998. The War of 1812 oak. It's a majestic tree. You can see the scale of it next to those picture benches. A Quercus phellos, located at Oxon Hill Farm in Oxon Hill, Maryland, planted at least in the early 19th century, possibly the 18th century. The tree has stood as a living witness to a remarkable history from the War of 1812. This is a 17th century tract of land overlooking the Potomac River, in the future Washington, D.C. Ultimately became known as Oxon Hill Manor, and the house is known as Mount Welby, and that's the view in the lower right from Mount Welby toward D.C. as it was burning. The estate was situated near some of the worst fighting of the entire war and was in earshot of the Battle of Bladensburg, and was illuminated by the fires in our capital. And that remarkable willow oak survives as a witness. One of my favorites, the Fort Hunt Park Royal Visit Pin Oak, a Quercus palustris, down along the George Washington Memorial Parkway at Fort Hunt Park. The Fort Hunt Park Royal Visit Pin Oak is significant because of its association with the visitation of England's King George VI and Queen Elizabeth in June of 1939. The tree commemorates the visit to the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC facility established at Fort Hunt. President Roosevelt and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt used to showcase Fort Hunt as a model facility for CCC, and it played host to a great array of eminent foreign leaders, including future most prominent, the royal couple. 2 pin oak trees were planted in honor of the occasion. One of those trees still survives today to witness. The Lady Bird Johnson Park crabapple, a Malus species, and along the George Washington Memorial Parkway. Lady Bird Johnson Park is actually a man-made 157-acre island located immediately south of Theodore Roosevelt Island along the Virginia shore of the Potomac River, at the west terminus of Arlington Memorial Bridge, sort of the symbolic entrance to the nation's capital. In 1901, the Macmillan Commission began to develop plans for the present design of Washington's City Beautiful monumental core. Less well known, though, is the Commission's plan for a Columbia Island. In 1932, the Arlington Memorial Bridge and the Mount Vernon Memorial Parkway opened to the public. The last phase of the work on the Mount Vernon Memorial Parkway project included seeding the grass on Columbia Island and planting approximately 75 ornamental flowering trees. A very few amount of these crabapples exist, and this one certainly is a mammoth example of a crabapple tree. I think my favorite, the Frederick Douglass white oak, Quercus alba, located at the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site in southeast Washington, D.C. Frederick Douglass, of course, was one of our nation's leading abolitionists, author, editor, orator, reformer, statesman, and diplomat. He lived at Cedar Hill. He died there in 1895. The Frederick Douglass white oak commanded a prominent location in front of the property. You can see it in the historic photograph. That same V in the branches exists in the V in the large photograph on the other side of the image. It's located directly outside his library and witnessed his hours of long work. It was the largest remaining tree in the property. Sadly, it has died and has been removed. The only remaining archival record being, of course, the witness tree documentation. The Big Daddy, Methuselah, the willow oak, a Quercus fellows, located on the George Washington Memorial Parkway, right near one of the parking lots near Bellhaven. If you've ever driven north on the George Washington Memorial Parkway from Mount Vernon, you more than likely have enjoyed those incredibly beautiful banked curves, the landscaping, the views, and sort of the way the parkway integrates into the terrain. The George Washington Memorial Parkway is actually the first comprehensively designed modern roadway built by the federal government. The subtle things that you noticed when driving on it made it quite revolutionary for its time. You may have also noticed one such curve, those gracious curves, is gently interrupted by sort of a hiccup for no immediately obvious reason. But if you go the desired 35 miles per hour, you may have noticed an immense tree located relatively close to the road. The National Park Service staff affectionately referred to this specimen, an immense willow oak, as Methuselah. Such respect commanded actually altering the road alignment in order to preserve the massive tree. These mature trees, a Quercus fellows, normally range in size from 40 to 60 feet tall with a 30 to 40 inch spread in the crown, from about 110 to 228 inches around the trunk. Methuselah's dimensions were significantly greater than all three of those, double some of those. It's 160 feet across the base of that tree. Sadly, it was hit by a car, and I believe lightning, and has since been removed. See, that's how much we love trees. Indeed. But this, of course, is the only remaining archival record. Just a few more. In Georgetown, the Tudor Place tulip poplar, a Liriodendron tulipifera, located in Georgetown, District of Columbia, on the Great Estate. The tulip poplar is one of the largest and most valuable hardwoods of eastern North America. Its spread is unbelievable. It's from Connecticut and southern New York, southern Ontario, northern Ohio, all the way down to Louisiana and Florida as a massive growth area. This particular Tudor Place tulip poplar is significant due to its association with the Peter family of Georgetown and their development of the Tudor Place estate. Tudor Place was designed by Dr. William Thornton, same architect that designed the large structure across the street, the U.S. Capitol. But this tree is an absolutely massive specimen and occupies an extremely prominent location on the south lawn. Certainly among one of the oldest tulip poplars in Washington, D.C., growing since the beginning of property's long 200-year evolution. And interestingly, Tudor Place is the only private property protected by a National Park Service easement. Here's a local boy or girl. This is the Union Square Zelkova, Zelkova carpinifolia, located just at the bottom of the hill here in Union Square. The Botanic Garden elm is an absolutely incredible ornamental shade tree, unlike any other tree in the mall. It's significant because of its rarity, its longevity, and its association with the original United States Botanic Garden. It is also significant due to its preservation by Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., recognizing its uniqueness in the world and certainly in Washington, D.C., during his redesign of the modern National Mall. In 1820, Congress authorized the Columbian Institute for the Promotion of Arts and Sciences. to found first the United States Botanic Garden on the site currently occupied by Union Square at the base of the hill by the big by the big lake down there, an area approximately 10 acres. In the 1850s, the first greenhouses and the gardens were established. This historic photograph shows the conservatory with it's about 300 feet long totally, with a central dome and two long wings. The late 19th century photograph in the lower right-hand corner also shows where the original location of the Bartholdi Fountain is from 1877 to 1927. It's now on the opposite Independence side of Independence Avenue. The remaining Zelkova is a truly unique specimen on the mall, as you can see by the photos. I really would encourage you to walk down and see it. It's sort of right before the street where the cross street is for the Native American Museum. So memorize that picture. And finally, the 1910 Japanese flowering cherry trees, Prunus yedoensis, located unusually in this situation on East Potomac Golf Course, East Potomac Park, Haynes Point. You may all know that the history of the famous flowering cherry trees of Washington, D.C. begins in 1885. A prominent city resident, a travel writer, and a photographer, Eliza Rahama Skidmore, first traveled to Japan. She was deeply impressed by the beauty of the cherry blossoms and the prominent place that this flowering tree holds in Japanese culture. Upon her return to Washington, D.C., she lobbied Congress for 24 years to plant those trees. And finally, in 1909, she was almost ready to give up. She decided to raise the money herself and purchase the trees, and then donate them to the city. She sent a letter explaining all this to First Lady Taft, who embraced the project immediately, and this ultimately resulted in a gift of 2,000 trees on behalf of the city of Tokyo. They arrived, 1910. To the great disappointment of all parties, a United States Department of Agricultural inspection team discovered that the trees had some insect infection. So the USDA determined that the trees must be destroyed, and on the 20th of January, President William Howard Taft reluctantly gave the order to burn the trees that his wife had just helped acquire. A second and even more generous donation of an even larger group of trees arrived in March of 1912, with the first two trees planted by First Lady Taft and Viscountess Shinda the following day. Those are the trees we know. And now for the rest of the story. It has long been assumed that none of the cherry trees from the 1910 shipment survived destruction. That's simply not true. As we heard earlier, one of them is here on the library grounds on the southeast corner, I think it is, and the rest of them, under recently discovered evidence, suggests that a small group of 24 of them were taken under close observation by government entomologists for scientific analysis. And today, approximately 18 of the 24 survived. They are very, very old Yoshino cherry trees. They're located on land now occupied by the East Potomac Golf Course. They are not only the oldest, but some of the largest cherry trees in Washington, D.C. But they also have survived more than twice their expected maximum age that's expected for the species, and they really have grown to an extraordinary size, as you can see by some of the photographs. These witness trees are these 1910 cherry trees and the 1912 cherry trees are a living and enduring reminder of the goodwill and friendship shared by the people of Japan and the United States. Thank you very much.
Dr. Dolinsky, was wonderful. I learned a lot. We would like to get some questions or comments.
I was wondering, one of the things I would love is a map of the large trees on the Capitol, and basically around the mall and everything, where you could have like a guide yourself on a tour, and a lot of them are labeled, but some are not.
Yes. Anticipating that question, the National Capital Region is going to do a brochure flyer of the witness trees. Most of them are in Washington, D.C. Some of them are outlying, like I said, Oxon Hill Farm and Antietam National Battlefield, and some are even further. The National Capital Region has unusual boundaries. So there will be a map coming out from NCR in the near future illustrating the location and a brief history of each one of the trees, as well as, more importantly, a link to the Library of Congress so you can read the complete reports and see all the photographs.
A question. What is the replacement policy when a tree dies? Do you match it with what was there originally, or do you put something new in?
I'm not uniquely qualified to answer that question, but in general terms, for example, a good example would be the magnolia at the White House that is replaced from cuttings from the actual tree, and there's another one been planted on the grounds on the right side, the original one's on the left side. But in general terms, that's an argument that has been going on for a long time. For example, some large plantations of formal plantings, like an allée at the Vacherie Plantation, some of those were severely destroyed around the Charleston area, and they left sort of a lot of vacant teeth, let's say, in the middle on the line. So some people have actually chosen to remove all and replace all with similarly sized new trees. On the mall here, you will see numerous replacements of the elm trees. One of the witness trees is the Jefferson elm, which is actually the species of elm that helped save us from the Dutch elm disease. And we're propagating that, and the new trees on the mall that are replacing the dying, expensive to maintain elm trees are the same species, Jefferson elms. Yes, ma'am.
Would you tell the story, or maybe it's legend, of the Cameron elm on Capitol grounds?
Well, I don't know that story. It's not a National Park Service tree, but I'd love to learn more about it. And there's no reason the Capitol can't do a witness tree protection program. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry.
How do you actually select the trees? Is there like a list of criteria? Do they have to have documentation?
That's a very good question. When I came up with this idea, I mean, literally, HALS is a mendicant order. We always have to go out and try to raise money for these things. And so I found the money, and by promising the National Capital Region that we use their region as a pilot, all of the National Park Service cultural resource managers in each one of the parks sent in their recommendations. And we gave them a series of filters. A witness tree is, witnessed an historic event, has to be, botanically, it has to be old, and a few other things. But approximately 24 actually came in, and we did whatever was sent in by the managers. They understood quickly and meaningfully what these trees were and came up with the list, and then we simply responded to it and did the work. Sir.
Thank you very much for a great presentation.
I appreciate that.
A lot of witness trees are logically along highways and roadways where things have happened, to the march, motorcade, by, and so forth. My experience in working with the Virginia Department of Transportation leads me to understand that in this day and age, transportation agencies often view large trees like this as too dangerous for them to be maintained. And in fact, have worked with some of the Arborist Associations to come up with a grading point system for their removal based on the fact that if there's a large tree near a highway with a lot of traffic, it should be removed. And I understand from other arborists who are critical of that, that's really an unfortunate development, because what's happening around the country is older trees, which are witness trees from the Civil War era and later,
Certainly.
Are being removed by transportation agencies based on this erroneous view that a large tree is too dangerous to. Does HALS do anything to push back against that?
Well, we have no bite in that sense. And I will say the Department of Transportation is sort of my enemy in all historic preservation projects. They have the big money and we have none. But our documentation is meant to, somehow acknowledge many of the houses or the homes you saw are gone as part of the Historic American Building Survey. I don't know the actual percentage of the collection, but this is simply, documentation of the existing condition and telling the story. And I have to believe, because I've seen it happen many times with saving historic houses and things, when HABS has gone in, we've drawn the building, we've had publicity, people tend to look at it with a different set of filters. And then respect develops. So ultimately, I think, maybe we can't, fight the Department of Transportation, but I think this program is making, at least the National Park Service, and I know a lot of other private sector as well as state programs, acknowledge the significance of historic trees and document them. And I think that it can only lead to the next step, which is the respect and potential preservation of them. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if there's a landscape survey of Yosemite National Park?
There is, well, yes and no. There are portions of it that have been measured in great detail. For example, I just finished a project documenting Curry Village. But the park in total, no. But discrete, the historic structures and Curry Village and certain areas have been done, but not in total.
Were you able to label the Awani?
I just knew you were going there. I knew you were going there. It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? They have a little, a shroud now over the sign of the Awani, and they've renamed it something or other. Our documentation uses the original historic name.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yes, ma'am.
I know that HABS, HALS, in general propagate standards for documentation, and I'm just wondering I don't actually know, what are the standards for documenting a tree?
Very good point. The standards fall back on literally the standards established in 1933 and 34, and that is that the documentation needs to be durable. Okay, if there are measured drawings being done, we will draw site plans for trees and locations within the site, and that's durably done on an archival vellum, usually done with an archival ink in that sense. It has to be, the historical research, of course, has to be verifiable, and that simply means footnotes. Everything is formatted in that there are certain sizes for the sheets of drawings, for the sheets of historical research, and a format for the photographs. So all those type of standards apply when you're doing a tree. You're photographing it, you're researching it, you're drawing it in planned format or in some other way. So the same apply to buildings or engineering sites. We simply, think outside the box a little bit. Yes, sir.
It might have been answered already, but not every old tree is a witness tree. And how does one become a witness tree?
I'm not sure she made. Basically, it's cultural association with some sort of event. It has to have, the Burnside Bridge sycamore was there the day the battle occurred. Frederick Douglass, was inspired by the white oak tree out in front of his library. There's a direct association with the cultural and the natural. Okay. Sir.
Thank you for that. That was a great presentation. And I actually had a question specifically about the cherry trees. Are there any entities in Japan that are interested in how they're doing and the current things about that? Because I know that we're really good at documenting that and things, but I've always wondered, since it was a gift from them, if there's any people back there that...
It's a very good question. It's hard to answer. I'm not so sure I'm capable of answering that question, but this enduring relationship of our countries regarding those trees, and I don't know what the total count is today, but the 1912 shipment was 3,200 trees, and there must be 32,000 trees out there now in the city of Washington, and of course they're all Japanese cherry blossoms, and I don't know if there has been a continual relationship with Japan regarding exchange of trees, but I do know that every year there's a very spiritual and moving event for the cherry blossom event itself and the visit to the shrine there by the Jefferson Memorial Bridge. So I would say that is at least acknowledges the original planting by First Lady Taft and Viscountess Shinda.
Would you like to add
One more?
something?
Yes.
But yes, there is an ongoing connection. Who asked the question? And there are entities in Japan that are interested beyond the government in making sure that the connection keeps going. I can talk to you offline after as well.
Thank you, Anne.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Did I understand that you have documentation in all but one of the states?
Correct. HALS is now represented in 49 of the 50 states. We're still fighting for, I think it's either South Dakota or North Dakota.
Okay, so if I was going to visit Idaho, for example, I could go online and find out where in Idaho the witness trees were. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, there are no witness trees in Idaho, but you can go online at the Library of Congress. The Witness Tree Project is is it's moving slowly, shall we say, but it's popular in the national parks, not so much in the States, but they're starting to pick up on it. But what I'd recommend is, well, I just couldn't imagine going to any state without checking the HABS or HALS collection at the Library of Congress. And, you know, it's extremely retentively organized. I mean, they drive me crazy.
I just want to mention that I wish I could show it here. It's just simple. Go to LLC.gov, Library of Congress, LLC.gov/pictures. Then you type in the search box, HABS or HALS.
Yeah. Or Burnside Sycamore. It'll go right to the drawings and photograph. Yeah. Any one of these, you go right to them, you can read the entire report. I don't think, there might be a workout that way, yes. You get all the pictures and all the written. These, I'm just giving you, of course, just a snippet of the history, trying to cover a few of them, but some of these are very large documents, and they're very interesting. We had a young historian work on them that was a particular Civil War buff. So the Burnside Bridge Report is like 30 pages. I know more than I ever want to know about Ambrose Burnside.
And it does say, does it not, whether or not the tree is still there?
No, it does not.
Oh my gosh.
No, it does not. Our record is of the year we did it. It has subsequently been removed. Those trees have been removed. I apologize, some of them.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir.
Just a point of information on whether there's a continuing relationship between the U.S. and Japan. I know about 2 years ago, the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo donated, I believe, 1,000 trees from the official tree of Virginia, whatever it is.
Tulip poplar, I think. Dogwood, a dogwood tree. Okay, thanks.
Dogwood, maybe, yeah. They donated that to Japan in the spirit of friendship and as part of the Tomodachi post-tsunami efforts to rekindle U.S.-Japan relations.
Yeah.
And those trees have been planted all over Japan.
Eliza Skidmore would be proud. Is that it? Okay, one more.
I had actually read about a town somewhere in Australia that had, for practical reasons, they assigned, I can't remember if it was Twitter addresses or email addresses to the trees in the town for like
Yes.
monitoring purposes, and I wondered if people started writing to the addresses.
Yeah, I think that's, I saw that article as well. I thought it was really very, very clever because it does, in some way, very similar what we're trying to do with the witness trees and somehow get people to acknowledge trees. But they have GPS points in all the trees, and each tree is numbered, and people, write the story or tell if there's a problem. They keep it they keep track of it that way. I did see that as well.
I was curious if you had thought of doing something like that as sort of public promotion. I mean, I'm sure there'd be all kinds of direct too.
Well, I think there would be a great app on a phone, like a witness tree app, that you would, pull up on your phone and click Washington, D.C., and you click it, and it takes you to the library, takes you to the location. So let's talk about that. We can make some money on that.
Well, thank you very much, and
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.